All right, welcome guys. This is going to be our first video for this class. I'm going to try and make it short and sweet, but this is going to be on solving equations. Now, hopefully you already know how to solve equations because this is probably the number one thing that you have done more than anything else in math, but just in case you forgot, we're going to go over it today. And you definitely want to make sure you know how to solve equations because we're going to do that a lot this year. So couple things with solving equations, all right? Thing number one, if you see parentheses like we have here, all right, you should know that you need to use the distributive property, all right? The distributive property is when you multiply whatever is out in front of the parentheses by everything inside of the parentheses. And that even includes that negative sign, right? Because we know this is actually kind of like -1. So we're multiplying everything in here by -1, right? Not just the first thing. So we have 16 minus 7m minus 3, right? Because we're multiplying both the 7m and the 3 by -1. All right, we're going to do the same thing over here with this 8. So we've got 8 times 1 is 8, and then 8 times -m is -8m. Okay. Next thing, all right, in solving equations is combining like terms, right? You guys know what like terms are. If they have the same letter, you can combine them. If they're just a normal number, they can combine them. So on this left side, all right, the two like terms that we have are 16 and -3. So we want to do 16 minus 3, that's 13. So we're going to have 13 minus 7m equals 8 minus 8m. Now, we don't have any like terms on each side that we can combine, but we can start moving things. So when you have an m on both sides, all right, we have minus 7m and we have minus 8m, all right? The rule that you want to follow is that the smallest m is the one that you want to cancel out and move to the other side, right? So we know that we cancel something out by doing the opposite. So since this is -8m, we're going to add 8m to both sides. The reason you want to pick the smallest letter to move to the other side is because you want your answer to be positive. So if you're moving the smaller one over, then it's always going to be positive. So -7 plus 8, that's just 1, right? So we just have 1m left. And then we are now going to do the same thing with our numbers. Now, we want the m to be by itself, right? So since the m is going to end up being on the left side, the other thing on the left side, we're going to want to move over. So we're going to want to subtract 13 from both sides. So this will cancel out. We have 8 minus 13 is -5. All right? And so that's our answer. M equals -5. Next question, all right, we're going to get a little bit more complicated here. I'm just going to try and show you guys a bunch of stuff. So this one, we've got a dreaded fraction, right? Everyone hates fractions. What do we do when we have a fraction? We want to get rid of it. How do we get rid of fractions, all right? We want to multiply by whatever is on the bottom, okay? Just get rid of the fraction. Multiply by whatever is on the bottom. So if we multiply by -4 on both sides, we always do things on both sides. These -4s will end up canceling out. Now, we do not do any multiplication up here on top, all right? I've seen people do that. The reason is because the -4 on top and the -4 on bottom just canceled each other out and went away. So there's nothing left to multiply on top. So everything on top stays exactly as it is. And then we just multiply on the right. So -15 times -4 is +60. All right, a negative times a negative is a positive. And now there's two ways that we could go about solving this. All right, the first way is that we could distribute here. All right, and that's a perfectly fine way. And then you could solve it out. The other thing you could do, though, is that you could recognize that this is multiplication. And the way to undo multiplication is with division. So you could divide by 3, all right? So instead of having to multiply that, you're basically just getting rid of that factor of 3, and then you are making your numbers smaller. So these 3's cancel out, so we have 5 minus 3x equals 20. And then now we can solve, so you guys know we need to get that x by itself. So we need to move the number over, so subtract 5. This negative sign stays, all right? I've seen some people forget about that in the past. So we got negative 3x equals 15, and our last step is to divide by our coefficient. Divide by negative 3. These negative 3's cancel out, and we get x equals negative 5, and that's our final answer. So it doesn't matter which step you do when you're here, all right? If you did distribute that out, you should get the same answer. So we got x equals negative 5. Next problem, C. So C, all right, this one is a little bit different than the one I just showed you because you don't really have the option here that you had before of dividing. So let's say we wanted to get rid of that and divide by negative 3. Can you divide 16 by 3 and get a whole number? The answer is no. So all you're doing here is just creating more fractions. So can't really do that here. So you're kind of forced into distributing. So we're going to distribute this negative 3. So multiplying fractions, right? We'll go over this real quick. If you are multiplying fractions, you multiply straight across, all right? It's the easier method than adding and subtracting. So this negative 3, all right, you guys know that if it doesn't have a denominator, that means its denominator is 0. So if you multiply straight across, negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. 1 times 4 is 4. So this is negative 3/4. Negative 3 times 10 is negative 30, so we can just make that minus 30 over 3. All right. Now, what do we notice here? We can simplify, all right? That's good. That makes this problem way easier, all right? So anytime you can simplify a number, go ahead and do that. So what is 30 divided by 3? Well, 30 divided by 3 is 10. So we can just make this minus 10, all right? And now we can go ahead and start solving. We're not gonna have to worry about finding a common denominator or anything like that. So we wanna get this q by itself. So we're gonna add 10 on both sides. Negative 16 plus 10 is negative 6. All right, and what do we do here, okay? Our coefficient is a fraction, all right? So how do you get rid of that coefficient? Because if it's just a whole number, we would just divide by that. But dividing by a fraction, you know, doesn't really make it clear what the answer is. If you ever want to get rid of a coefficient that's a fraction, like we have here, all right, you're gonna just multiply by the reciprocal, okay? The reciprocal is the fraction upside down. So you'll see me say this a lot this year, right? Multiply by the reciprocal. The reason this works is because this 3 cancels out with that 3. This 4 cancels out with that 4. This negative sign cancels out with this negative sign. And so everything goes away and you're just left with q. So you're gonna multiply by the reciprocal on both sides, all right? And that is going to eliminate that fraction. So now we just have q left. So now we just need to figure out, all right, what is negative 4 times, or sorry, negative 4/3 times negative 6. So we know that's over 1. So just like before, we're gonna multiply straight across. So we have negative 4 times negative 6, that's 24. We have 3 times 1, that's 3. And now we just need to think about, can we simplify this at all? Yeah, we can. So 24 divided by 3 is 8, all right? So that gives us our final answer of q equals 8. So even though this problem looks very challenging, right, with those weird fractions, if you just trust the math and go through it, we got a whole answer. Next problem. All right, letter D. We have more fractions. Yay, more fractions. The reason we're going over all this fraction stuff is because that's usually what you guys forget the most. So we don't want to go over the easy stuff that you guys already remember. So what do we do here? All right. What we want to do is get a common denominator, right? Whenever you're adding or subtracting fractions, you need to have a common denominator. So our denominators are 8 and 3. So we want to think about what is the least common multiple of 8 and 3. That is going to be 24. All right. We don't really have any other option other than just multiplying those two numbers. So we're going to go over all of these, and we need to turn the bottoms into 24. So 8 multiplies by 3 to make 24. 3 multiplies by 8. So we're going to multiply both of these fractions by 8 over 8. So when you're finding a common denominator, remember you're multiplying on the bottom and on the top, right? You're scaling that whole fraction so that the number stays the same. So we've got 3 times 7, so we've got 21 over 24x, minus 8 times 1 is just 8, so we have 8 over 24. And then we have 8 times 13, which is, let's put it in our calculator, 104 over 24. So now that we have a common denominator, we can just solve. So how do we want to solve this? All right. What I would do, and you guys don't have to do this, you can do it your own way, is that since the denominators are all the same, all right, we can get rid of them. Okay? And the way that we're going to do that is by multiplying by that denominator on both sides. This way, now you have no more fractions, all right? So this 24 right here, it cancels out with these 24s. This 24 cancels out with that 24. And basically what happens is you're just left with your numerators. So if you don't like fractions and you want to get rid of the fractions, find a common denominator, and then you can basically just get rid of that denominator. All right, if we multiply by 24 on both sides, all right, we distribute here. So all our denominators canceled, and now we can just solve. So now this is just a normal problem. So add 8 on both sides. 21x equals 112. Divide by 21. I don't think 21 goes into 112, so it looks like we're going to get a decimal here. Yeah, so we've got 5.3 repeating, or 5 1/3. All right. We could have solved this with the fractions and done a bunch of fraction work, but that's just way more effort than doing this. All right. Once you get all those denominators the same, get rid of all those denominators, just leave your numerators as your coefficients and solve your problem. All right, so E and F. E and F are the same question. And the reason we put the same question here twice is to show you both ways. So we're going to kind of talk about what I just showed you with D, all right? But here you can do it right away. So the reason you can do it right away here is because 3 goes into 6, right? So if we want to get everything with a common denominator, the least common multiple would just be 6, right? So we can multiply by 6, and that's going to cancel out with this 3. It's going to cancel out with this 6, and then over here, 5 times 6 just equals 30. So if you look here, so 6 over 1, so 6 divided by 3 is 2, right? So that becomes 2x. The 6 will cancel out with that 6, so that just becomes minus 7, and then 5 times 6 is 30. So this is kind of skipping a step. We don't even need to do the common denominator step because we recognize that 3 goes into 6. So if you have this situation, just multiply by that 6. It scales everything up, and then now we have whole numbers. So now we can just solve, so add 7 on both sides. 2x equals 37, divide by 2. This is definitely a decimal. X is going to be, I believe, 18.5. All right. So that was pretty easy, but let's say that you didn't realize that, right? And you just looked at this problem and you knew that your least common multiple was 6. So you needed everything to have a denominator of 6. So you would multiply this by 2 over 2. You would multiply this by 6 over 6. And so this would become 2/6 x minus 7/6 equals 36, right? So you can see here the connection, right, between these two steps. Over here on the left is just the same numbers without the denominator, right? So you could do here what I showed you above, which is to just multiply everything by 6, what we did up here with the 24, and just get rid of that denominator, and then you've turned it into this question. But what if we wanted to do it with the fractions, right? We haven't really talked about that yet. So what if we did want to add 7/6 to both sides, okay? Well, we can do that. These cancel out. This becomes 2/6x. 30 plus 7 is 37 over 6. Remember, when you're adding and you have a common denominator, you add the tops and then the bottom stays the same. All right, and what do we do here? All right, we have a fraction of 2/6. Well, remember, if you want to get rid of that fraction, you multiply it by the reciprocal. So these will cancel, so we have x by itself, and now we're multiplying, right? So remember, we multiply straight across. So we have to do 37 times 6. That's 222. Then we have to do 6 times 2, that's 12. And if we do 22 divided by 12, we get 18.5. So hopefully you guys believe me now. All right, there's different ways to do things. If you understand math and you understand how numbers work, you can make your life easier. If you don't, all right, recognize ways that to get rid of the fractions, you can still solve it like we did here for f with the fractions, and you'll get the right answer, right? We got 18.5. So if you have any questions about this, make sure you ask them in the beginning of class, all right, tomorrow. And other than that, have a great day.